Hello, my name's Ruth Angela. I've written the book that you see here called The Guru's Gift, A Kundalini Awakening. This picture, if you can see it, is a diagram of a dream that I had in 1974, which began this whole process of the Kundalini Awakening. I would like to read you chapter 7 from the book, which is about my Shaktipat initiation. It's called Shaktipat initiation, which means the touch of the energy, God energy, from a great being like a saint or a guru in my case. That was Muktananda. On the night of February the 13th, July 1979, my neighbor Cheryl and I rode in her yellow Volvo a mile from our house to the meditation center. Cheryl was anxious to share with me the peace and tranquility she'd found there. I had a good feeling about the word meditation, and my daughter's preschool teacher, Anita, had been a meditator and had been calm and composed in all kinds of crises. So I was already convinced that meditation would certainly help me get some relief from my tension and the ball of stress that I felt. In a road just off the beach was a pretty single-story home owned by an Italian-American couple, Rob and Leah. They ushered us in with joy sparkling in their eyes. Since I was new to meditation, Rob took about 10 minutes to explain to me how I should meditate and follow their program. I listened carefully. Rob said I should participate as fully as I could in following the chant along with a tape that would stop at a certain point, and then we were to sit quietly and say the phrase Om Namah Shivaya anytime my mind wandered off into other things. Then Rob ushered the small group of people into a large, dark room with no furniture, the men on the right and the women on the left. They would sit cross-legged on pillows on the carpet, and at the front of the room was a large picture of a bearded Indian man with a red dot on his forehead here. I felt a little uncomfortable about this picture and decided that I wouldn't look at it. And I wasn't going to worry about it because it was not anything to do with me. It was about their sacred icons and these Italian people, and I didn't know them, and so it was none of my business. The program started with a hymn sung in a strange language. I later found out was Sanskrit. Following this, Rob read a passage from a book by the spiritual teacher, Muktananda, with questions and answers, and then he put on a tape and we started to chant. There was a lyrical Indian drumming and some organ music which offset the chant phrases that were repeated, first the tape leading singers and then the audience. It reminded me of the call and response of the Episcopal churches where I'd sung in the choir throughout my childhood. I found myself relaxing. The language was not English but Sanskrit. I could not make out any recognizable phonemes for quite a long time, and then naturally I got into the swing of it and was joining in with everyone else. We chanted in a call and response pattern. And then we repeated that for 2 rounds, and then the music changed and we repeated again for 2 rounds in a different melody. It seemed soothing and comforting. Although I did not understand the words, I stuck with it, giving it my all, as always. The chanting continued for 30 minutes. Then a new tape was started with a very slow, almost dirge-like and rather anguished chant of Om Namah Shivaya. I have this chant on my website. If you click on the picture, you will hear that very same chant that I heard. This was the tape which would put me into meditation, the mantra tape. In the darkened room, I felt floaty and noticed that the tension in my stomach had not occupied my mind at all. I noticed how relaxed I felt, dreamy and safe. My body started to sway, and sometimes I felt a muscle jerk, as if something readjusted. My arms felt ephemeral, gradually feeling strange in the lower arm, but I could not move them as I was so relaxed. After 30 minutes, the tape stopped and there was silence. Everyone by now was in a very quiet and peaceful state. I remembered the instructions to repeat the same syllables silently inside. I was aware then that my arms and hands were dead and paralyzed, as if the blood had drained out of them. Gradually my fingers became rigid, stretched out in front as if pulled by some force. I was curious, but I wasn't alarmed. My breathing got faster, and I had a realization that all the tension would leave me. The tension in my gut was bubbling up out of my mouth like that. And I found my head naturally falling back for the bubbles to emerge. For a while it was amusing to feel the bubbles coming out of my mouth, but then I started to sob. Somewhat embarrassed and self-conscious, I blew my nose quietly and sat cross-legged again and said the mantra quietly under my breath. Suddenly, my head was jerked back, firmly, as if by a very strong tug from behind. My throat was thrust toward the ceiling, and my head pressed farther back than I ever thought it would go. So I wondered if my neck would break. I could not barely breathe. At the same time, my spine stiffened like a rod, so I couldn't relieve the pressure in my head and neck. The force was phenomenal and totally in control. I stayed rigidly locked in this position while the bubbles of tension continued to rise, bubbling out of my fish-like mouth like this. My chest heaving in deep sobs and tears pouring down my face. Fixed in this position, sobbing out of control, I remained thus for at least 15 minutes, until the tension bubbles emptied out. My hands and their rigid spread fingers were receiving waves of blue electricity. I seemed to be plugged in some enormous energy socket through my hands, and I had no idea where it was coming from. Then, just as unexpectedly, the tension holding my neck released, and I curled up in a pile and unashamedly sobbed and sobbed. It was like having a weeping catharsis in public, yet I didn't care who saw this dramatic sobbing. I was relieved of my tension. I was soaring in bliss. My social concerns had fled. All I knew was incredible relief, because the tension had indeed all gone. I felt warm and fuzzy as I used to feel when I'd cried as a child and had been comforted by my mother. The group of people in the meditation center quickly left me to recover while they went into another room. Bob and Leah were grinning with joy. Their eyes were sparkling with excitement. After a while, I was able to stop crying and join the others, feeling somewhat embarrassed but not really caring because I was in bliss. Rob and Leah said, "Your Kundalini's been awakened." I had no idea what that meant, but I knew I felt incredible. They seemed to be thrilled about it. Cheryl was not sure, was rather confused and puzzled, as were some of the other guests. Rob said, "This is very auspicious for you." I really didn't pay much attention, because at that point all I knew was I came there as a wreck of tension at 7:30, and by 9:30 p.m. I was leaving on a cloud. I felt as if I were floating above the ground. I felt in love in the deepest way. I felt totally whole. I was entirely a new being in just 2 hours. That evening, after Cheryl dropped me off, I looked up at the sky and really seeing stars. I felt them speaking to me as my best friends. I felt such a close affinity to every star so that I could almost give them personality profiles. I was equal to the stars. I was among them. I was singing with them. At home, I sat down in the semi-dark to contemplate what had happened, and a fly alighted on my hand. I watched it walk around, and then somehow I knew I could talk to it. So I gave it instructions about where to walk, and it did everything I asked. If such a thing had happened, and a fly had alighted on my arm in the past, I would have never believed that I could tell it what to do. But everything I said to do, it did it. Something in me had definitely shifted gears or dimensions. I felt deeply in love with the fly, with the stars, with life, from a nervous wreck that had a ball of unrelenting tension and an out-of-control life. In a few hours, I'd become calm, a divine being, at one with the universe. I had no way of understanding anything at that point, but all I knew was intense and unrelenting bliss. Years later, I was to find out that on the Mayan calendar, this day was called Chichan, number 9, which is the sky serpent, or Kundalini, and 9 is for the completion of a universal cycle, fulfillment. On the Gregorian calendar, it was Friday the 13th of July, 1979. The genie had burst its bottle. I was tasting the bliss of the awakening without knowing that there was yet an alchemical process I still had to go through. And that's what's in the remainder of the book, the information about that process that I went through. And that maybe if you're watching this on my website, you also may be going through a similar kind of process. Don't be afraid. That is the worst thing, to be afraid. This is an absolutely wonderful event, one that happens once in many, many lifetimes. It may not be that in this lifetime you will reach the state of knowing yourself as divine, but that's the goal of this process, that it clears away the conditioning of your mind that has been going on, not just through this life, but many past lives, making you think you are just a body and that you are nothing more than one little lifetime. You are eternal. You never die. A body is a gift that is given to you to go through this process. A human birth is incredibly rare. Don't waste it. Don't throw it away on minor things. Don't drink. Don't do drugs. Treat everybody with respect as if they are God also. I wish you the best of luck with this process. I came through it, as my book shows, and many, many people today are going through the same process. It is not easy. It is not the simplest thing in the world, and it certainly isn't something anyone would invite into their lives. And I would ask you not to invite it into your life unless it has already spontaneously occurred to you, or that you have a very wise and seasoned teacher that can take care of you through the process, because your whole mind is going to be turned over like a mattress. Everything you think is who you are is going to be completely destroyed and changed. What will emerge will be a being that knows that you are part of the universe, that you never die, and that God is within you as you. Bless you. This is Ruth Angela, September 2014. Bye-bye.